There are so many challenges for Black people living in Oregon. Oregonians outside of the Black cultural experience often don't realize how intense our reality can be.
My daughter, she couldn't wait to leave in Oregon.
Our guest today, a retired nurse practitioner with over 40 years of experience, Deidre Greene, shared how her daughter experienced the exclusion and discrimination of racism as a young adult while in the confines of a predominantly white institution.
Yeah, she will never live in Oregon because of the experience in a high school in Albany. She was pretty traumatized.
The source came from the very thing that was supposed to be a symbol of pride, adorned on athletic uniforms, banners, and school sweatshirts.
I mean, their mascot was the rebel, like with a Confederate flag. Yeah.
A kid dressed up as a Confederate soldier, parading across the football field with a large flag that is a symbol of slavery. That mascot has since been changed, but the cultural residue has left a scar. Welcome to Black Care Matters, the show where we honor the unique experiences of Black nurses working in the Pacific Northwest. I'm your host, Rashida Quinn. In recognizing that Black lives matter, it's crucial that the care for these nurses also matters. Cultural white supremacy has had a detrimental impact on the American healthcare system. Each nurse's story reveals rich insight towards the possibilities of a better future. Deidre Greene shares with us how growing up in a predominantly Black community in New Jersey helped propel her into a position of leadership in nursing, and how she transformed that into becoming a nurse practitioner here in Oregon, and the tough decision she had to make to navigate the minefield of white supremacy from her daughter's school to when her church community of 20-plus years turned their back on racial justice. It's a conversation full of profound, honest reflection, only on Black Care Matters. Been talking a lot throughout this show about the experience of 2020 and how that impacted nurses. It impacted the healthcare world. We saw this huge shift because of COVID. But also on top of that, we were dealing with the racial reckoning of George Floyd and how that impacted Black communities and white communities. And I know for you, there was an experience within a church that was predominantly white, and sort of watching the reactions of that community made a big impact and shifted some things for you.
I was a member of that church for like 15 years.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. And then when I retired, it was right at the time of COVID and Trump and Black Lives Matter. But my church, they just had a disappointing response. They just didn't seem to want to address it, head in the sand sort of attitude. But then when the election happened and no speaking out against the injustices that were happening, that made me want to leave that church. I had been really active for like 15 years, did first aid, I got defibrillators in the church, I did EpiPen trainings. So that was really disappointing. It changed my whole attitude about what else I'm supposed to be doing for the Black community, for people of color and health inequities. And it was like widespread. It's all over, it's not that one church, but in America in general that don't respond to racism or inequities They're more comfortable being comfortable. We'll have the status quo and not rock the boat.
Would you say this was your first time in Corvallis directly having to be present with a more prominent racial dynamic?
Yes, for sure. Yes, it was a reawakening of my Black identity. I didn't really know any Black people in Corvallis. It was my family and church family. I wasn't connected with the Black community.
Yeah.
And now I'm going to be losing friends I've been with for 15 years. That was a hard decision, but you can't really worship if you're feeling like people are discriminating against you. So.
You grew up in a predominantly Black community.
Yes. I grew up in Asbury Park, New Jersey. I had a really fortunate upbringing. The household was stable, and I had a community of Black people. And we had a Black dentist, a Black pharmacist, principals, teachers. I didn't know any Black nurses, but I just saw a lot of people getting educations, and I knew that I was on that path since I was a little kid. So.
And what was childhood like?
We were on a Jersey shore, so we spent a lot of time at the beach and hanging out there.
I imagine that, as you said, like your doctor, your dentist, like so many Black leaders all around you. It seems like a unique experience.
I didn't realize it at the time, but when I look back on it, I was able to have just a solid Black identity. And it was all around me, and you didn't even think about it when you're surrounded by it.
And you had an experience in high school that was super positive, a Black community. And what do you feel that your high school experience gave you that also helped punctuate your career in nursing?
I loved high school. I graduated in 1972. Lots of good music. We were going to New York to concerts and just hanging out at the beach. So we were having a great time. I was used to studying and teachers pushing me, and I joined future nurses clubs or did candy striping in hospitals. That was volunteers for kids who wanted to be nurses or in the medical profession. You
yourself wanted to be a nurse from an early age.
Yeah.
How did you know that about yourself as a child?
Well, I had an older sister, and she told me I'm going to be a nurse. She must have touched something in me because it happened.
I love that. That's really sweet that your sister was able to instill that in you, maybe not even fully knowing that you would take it on for the rest of your life.
She shares that I'm able to thrive in nursing, so she's a part of it.
After high school, you go to Virginia and attend Hampton, and that school has a large history around nursing and is one of the formative Black institutions after the Civil War. How do you feel that institution's history really influenced your ability to become a leader in the field?
They told us they're preparing us to be leaders. There, you had to have, certain average to be accepted. The dean graduated from NYU, and these were nurses who had their PhDs. This is back in the 70s, and they were doctors of nursing.
It sounds like mediocrity wasn't an option. When you graduate from Hampton, your first position was in New Jersey in nursing?
Yes.
And what was that like?
I had some Black nurses who kind of took me under their wing. So it was a couple of nurses in New Jersey, and they knew I just got out of school, and they just watched out for me. But I didn't really know what I was doing.
Yeah.
It's a whole different thing, academics, than when you get on the floor and you really have to take care of someone by yourself. You need support.
Was this at a big hospital?
Yeah, it was at the Veterans Administration in East Orange, New Jersey.
And then you moved to the West Coast.
Yeah, and I also met my husband there, so that my first nursing job.
Oh, that's where you met your husband.
Yeah. And then he was in the military in California, so he always wanted to go back. So I said, okay, let's go to California.
And you guys were in San Jose.
Yes.
And that's where you took a trauma care position. and you mentioned was really a highlight of your career in terms of the team you were working with and performing at a high level of excellence.
Yeah, it was a surgical trauma ICU. We just had such a great team. Everyone was so supportive of each other. And I had a young man, he wasn't real sick, so I was ready to get another patient if one came. But I had like a sixth sense that something was going on with him. And I told the assistant manager, I can't take another patient right now. I said, this kid is going down the tubes. And she said, okay, well, give the admission to someone else. And before the end of the day, he was on a ventilator and he stayed there for weeks. He was really sick. And he was just really close to dying. Maybe 19 years old, but he made it out. When you first start nursing, you're like a novice, and then you move towards the expert. And then as you get towards the expert, you develop this sixth sense, like something, you can kind of predict something's happening before people really crash. So that was an experience.
Wow. Was that a diverse group of nurses that you were working with?
Oh, yes. It was many different cultures. I don't know. We just saw a lot of trauma and surgical complications. And we just had such a team attitude. And we kind of like thought we were the best nurses in the hospital too. So.
Yeah.
That was fun.
Oh, that sounds like a special experience to thrive in.
Yeah. And then I had one colleague, and he was going to get his master's at University of California, San Francisco. So then that kind of spurred me to go and go to graduate school. I do remember the experience of telling the assistant manager, oh, I'm going to go to grad school. And she said like, oh, right. And I'm like, okay, well, that was a challenge.
Like she didn't think that you would. Right. Well,
yeah, she didn't know my whole background, right? What I was raised by.
So after these years of living in San Jose, your husband got a new job and there was a transition to Corvallis, Oregon, of all places.
Right.
Yeah. What were your initial thoughts about this whole
kicking and screaming?
Not interested.
Right.
Yeah. I mean, what a difference.
Yeah.
What'd you think when you got here?
Well, the first experience I had was trying to get a job. When I finally got a job in Corvallis, the manager said, well, you were really persistent, about getting a job. And I was thinking in the most qualified. Yeah, so I wasn't having it that I couldn't get a job, So
it was a challenge initially.
Yeah, it was initially a challenge.
You applied to a lot of different opportunities.
Yeah, just the ones in that area. But I knew where I wanted to work, but it wasn't like, okay, come in, sign up. It was like I had to keep calling to get a job.
And you spent 22 years of your career in Corvallis, right?
Mm-hmm. Right.
Wow.
Yeah.
I mean, that's a large amount of time.
Yes.
What are some of the highlights or challenges that you experienced?
One of the highlights was that I knew they planned on starting an open heart surgery program. So the nurses went up there to kind of learn. But I was prepared because that's what I did in San Jose. And I had just graduated with a master's in critical care trauma. So that was just like, wow, here's an opportunity.
Yeah.
I told them, you need a leader to help get nurses trained to take care of this population. And they developed the position.
Oh, wow.
It's like a teaching position.
So you were responsible for creating this team that would then go and be a part of this new endeavor with open heart surgery.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Wow.
Yeah. That was pretty cool.
Yeah. I mean, that's a pretty powerful space to be in with a huge amount of responsibility. And, what was it like for you teaching students under you and people that came in to learn?
I enjoyed it. I still see people in the community now, and they're like, oh, I loved you teaching us, because I would teach new grads or people new to ICU as well as doing open hearts.
Yeah.
And they know that I just enjoy the clinical setting, and they still tell me that I made a difference in their lives. And I'm the only Black nurse there.
Wow.
So, yeah, I didn't even know any other Black nurses at the hospital.
Well, I think that speaks to your expertise. I mean, that what you looked like did not determine your ability to do the job, and they kind of probably had to acknowledge that.
I just had a mindset that I wasn't worried about it. I might have been discriminated that I didn't even notice. Things could have happened, but for the most part, I was busy.
I imagine that open heart surgery and the patients that are coming from that is intimidating. But I'm curious, like, what is the kind of mindset or the things that really supported you in taking care of these critical patients?
Well, they kind of say ER nurses, ICU nurses, like, are kind of adrenaline junkies, and everyone's ready to hand the patient off to you. You have to get your environment and then keep an eye out for the unexpected while you keep things in line. So I don't know really how to explain it. I just was so confident. But I knew I could do it.
And your family, it's you and your husband, and do you have kids?
Yeah, we had 3 children.
You had 3 children.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And they grew up mostly here?
They had really hard experiences
than
really?
I
did. Yeah. My daughter really had a hard time. My son too. And they just thought I was oblivious to racism because they were experiencing it so much in schools. Mm-hmm.
That's interesting that you guys were, parallel of each other. You're in the same family and having really different experiences. Yeah. I'm curious if, as you're having this kind of, as you described it, reawakening within your Black identity, did it allow you to reflect and think about the 22 years at the hospital and whether there were moments that you were not as aware of or passed up or maybe were in your own comfort zone around racism, or did that just really feel very separate?
I remembered when I was in Corvallis, a friend and I ended up getting nurse practitioner degrees, but we both came back to Corvallis to start jobs as nurse practitioners. The administrations took us around to different clinics, but she got a job, but I couldn't get a job as a new grad. So that was,
and she was a white colleague.
So I'm like, okay, well, noted, but I got to move on. So I went and worked somewhere else, and in 2 years I came back and then worked for 20 more years.
So what happened when you moved into a more culturally accepting spiritual community? What was it like? Did you moved into a Black church?
Yeah, well, not completely Black. I don't know. The mindset is a lot different. I just felt the freedom. It's like a social justice church.
How do you feel you were able to use your leadership as a nurse to help the Black community?
I really give credit to Angel Harris, fellow Black nurse, and getting me involved in NAACP and ABNOW, the Black Nurses Association, and also Lynn Benton, Lincoln Health Equity Alliance in Albany. But then COVID was here, and then we needed vaccines because it was like, how many Black and brown people were dying from COVID. So I asked Angel and someone else, I wanted to have a meeting with the director of the health department in Albany. And I told them that, we're dying. We need to get shots like sooner, move us to the front of the line, basically.
Yeah.
And they did it. And just so many people of color got vaccinated like that. And then before it was criteria, you couldn't get it unless you were a certain age or certain. But I said, no, it's because we're dying. So, and that was unbelievable that it really happened.
Well, I'm sure your agency, as a well-respected nurse that was a leader in that community, helped for their listening abilities.
That was really rewarding too. So, and now I just try to stay close to the Black community. I try to do what I can. Give back.
what would you say is your advice for Oregonians listening to this story that are white, that want to be a part of allyship in a deeper way? How would you instruct them or give them advice around supporting the Black community?
I think admitting that there is structural racism and not opposing the truth, it's right there. And so don't be fearful because people don't look like you, and see people for what they really are, because people have different voices. It's not time to hear your voice every time.
Right.
Just listen to things and know people's stories.
I think that gives a lot to reflect on for our listeners, is that we are not a monolith as Black people. We're not all having the same experience, and we are learning from different perspectives. I think that a lot of white community members do have a Black mold that they expect all of us to come through. And that's just not the case. It's just not the case.
Right.
So.
Yeah. I do think of my experience like I wasn't like rocking the boat. I was going along with things and working the system, within the system, but it wasn't like someone who was outspoken on things or even seeing them. So yeah, that was my experience.
A little different than your daughter, who was trying to call attention to these things. Yeah. Well, this has been a lovely conversation, and I'm super grateful for you being on the show. And thank you for sharing so generously your story.
Thank you, Rashida. I appreciate you, and thank you for getting this all together. It's wonderful.
Deidre's upbringing in Asbury Park sounds like a Black utopia, with Black leaders and professionals in all aspects of her community. She goes from there to Hampton, a Black college with a rich history of Black excellence. I am impacted by how a foundation of Black representation makes such a difference in one's development and relationship to their Black identity. Deidre speaks of not being aware of discrimination in her 20-plus years as a nurse in Corvallis, Oregon. She says things may have happened, but she just kept moving forward. Her story stands as a stark contrast to her own children, who experienced racism at every turn growing up in the Albany school system. Getting out of Oregon was a top priority for her daughter in her adulthood due to the trauma of discrimination. The different experiences in this family shine a light on how powerful it is to grow up and learn about who you are in a community that is not saturated with white supremacy ideology. What freedom! So much room for self-actualization without the distraction of the fictitious rhetoric that casts Blackness as something that represents a deficiency. Deidre achieved an excellence that broke glass ceilings in her field. In Corvallis, she wasn't just handed her job. She had to push for the opportunities that came easy for her white counterparts. But when her hospital started a new ward for open heart surgery patients, she stepped up and said, "You need me to teach your nurses how to care for this population." And they did need her. She did teach those nurses. And she is the reason so many people with sick hearts received excellent care in her predominantly white community. Black excellence benefits the entire society. Dismantling the structures that limit Black identity will ultimately lead to more Black people being free to reach their full potential instead of spending precious energy untangling themselves from the web of trauma caused by racism. Black care not only matters, it changes the landscape of what is possible for us all. Thank you to the community in Asbury, New Jersey that instilled confidence in Deidre, creating such a force to be reckoned with. Thank you, Deidre, for teaching multiple generations of critical care nurses to do their jobs, for demanding that Black citizens in the Albany area get to be first in line for COVID vaccinations based on the fact that we were dying faster than other populations. And thank you for all the ways you extended care to the Black community. You have made such a powerful impact in this state. Join us next month as we continue to explore the beauty of these amazing nurses. Black Care Matters is presented by the Alliance of Black Nurses Association of Oregon, sponsored by the Oregon Center for Nursing, and was recorded at KBOO Studios here in Portland, Oregon. This episode was produced by Ida Hardin, with production support and mix mastering by Ramoy Phillip. Our executive producer and host, myself, Rashida Quinn. The Black Care Matters podcast website was designed by Brendan Quinn, with portrait art created by Ryan Alexander Tanner. Special thanks to Danae Hall of the Alliance of Black Nurses Association of Oregon, Kelly Castanegro, and our team at KBOO, Jezaniah Hawthorne, Zoe Ezekiels, and Selena Flores. This podcast would not be possible without the generous grant from Oregon Center for Nursing. Thank you to our grant team, Rick Allgeier, Don Schoenthal, and Callie Giesler. And here's a special invite to all of you, our listeners. Please engage with what you hear and learn on Black Care Matters. Did listening to an episode remind you of a racialized experience you had in healthcare? Did it strengthen your commitment to anti-racism in your own workplace or community? Did it bring up questions about how you can better speak out against white supremacy culture? Please reach out with your questions and comments at blackcarematters.org/contact. We would love to feature our listeners' feedback on a special episode of Black Care Matters. Your voice matters. Listen to Black Care Matters wherever you get your podcasts. And while you're there, why don't you leave us a review? Your words really do help us reach a wider audience. It's been a pleasure sharing this with you. We'll have a new conversation for you next month. Until then, remember, Black care does matter. It's a matter of how we make those words count.